Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name's David, David Beath. I head our content and creative here at 3Pillar, and I'm your webinar host for today. I am absolutely delighted that that both Lindsay and Scott have been able to make today's session and be able to give up their time to have this conversation about how digital products drive great customer experience. Scott, can I ask you to take me through to the next slide? I just need to go through a few housekeeping points before we get started. So I'm going to ask for you to make sure you're muted for the first part of this. Scott and Lindsay have a 40-minute talk that they're going to take us through. And you can, if you must, unmute by using the audio section of your control panel, but you are muted by default to allow us to listen to Lindsay and Scott. We are taking questions throughout, although we will answer them answer them in the last 25 or 20 minutes. And you can submit your questions via the questions pane on the control panel, and if you can't find that, we'll also be taking them through chat as well. Also just to let you know, this webinar is being recorded so that we can post this, share your questions and your thoughts back along with Lindsay's and Scott's. So before I get started, before I allow Lindsay and Scott to take over, I will do a little introduction. I know they'll introduce themselves as well. So Lindsay is our head of product management here at 3Pillar. I know that she'll tell us a little bit about that, but having worked with Lindsay for the last 2.5 years, I'm really excited to hear her perspective on this, and I know that she has much to share on this topic. And then we're really lucky as well to have Scott Varho with us, who's our SVP of product development. Scott until recently has been leading, so probably continues to lead actually, our culture and crafts, but also has extensive background leading design and product teams across a number of different companies. So again, a wonderful perspective, I think, coming from him too. On which note, I am going to hand over, keep my mouth shut, but if you need anything, I will be watching the chat panel along with Angela, who's behind the scenes.
Thanks, David. We're going to jump in with a kind of a staggering view of the future by the World Economic Forum, that an estimated 70% of new value created in the economy in the next decade will be based on digitally enabled platform business models. Now, digitally enabled platform business models is kind of a mouthful and hard to parse, but I think it's safe to say that digital products, and we're seeing this in our own lives, are becoming an increasing share of our experience and how we navigate the world. But I do want to pause for a second, and even because of the title of the webinar is how digital products drive great customer experiences, talk a little bit about what we mean by product, the concept of product. Product in a traditional sense was always something that was bought and sold. In the digital space, products, and we talk about product management, we craft a number of digital experiences that we will call products, but oftentimes those digital experiences are not necessarily bought and sold themselves. A lot of times, and one of my favorite examples of this is, there's a product team at my bank. I bank with Bank of America, and I have a mobile app as part of my service. I do not buy that mobile app. Bank of America does not sell that mobile app, but it's clearly a value add part of the service, the banking service that Bank of America is providing, and they absolutely have all the rigor of product around that application, so that they're delivering value through that mobile experience. So with that, we really are entering a new era of sophistication around digital product development. The technology trends are accelerating, they're confusing, and there's a lot of noise. And the really important thing as we reflect on this outlook is the stakes are higher than ever as well. So how do you navigate this in a way where you're spending your money, your time, your effort, and your resources well, and to stay competitive in in the digital economy and in a digitally dominated economy increasingly. Just to add to this, the war for talent and the costs are high and getting higher, and users' expectations, customer expectations are changing. It would be really helpful if our customers would stay still, but it turns out that, you know, as other products come out and other experiences evolve, you know, our users start to expect more from their products and different things from their products, and we need to make sure we understand those as we go. So today, Lindsay and I, our objective today is really to dive into the topic of customer experience, or CX as it's often shortened in our field, and its relationship to user experience, or UX, and try to really give you more of the signal through the noise. There's a lot of material out there. We're going to try to really essentialize it so that you have a crisper picture of how all these things fit together, and don't get lost in the jargon. So that's our goal, is to try to you know, make it easier for you to navigate through these concepts and terminology, and get the most from them. To get us started, I actually had a really funny experience this last weekend that seems oddly relevant, it's fantastic. So whenever my son wants to make money to buy something, my son is 12 years old, he sells Gatorade by the bike trail that's right by my house. Gatorade, lemonade, water, and he tried popsicles once, but it turns out it was too hot and they all melted. The other day I was walking on that trail, and there was another kid out there. My son is at sleepaway camp right now, and there was another kid out there, and he goes, lemonade? Would you like to buy some lemonade?" And I mean, it was a pretty amazing setup. He had a glass jar with plastic lemons in it on the table. He, you know, was wearing a tie and a short sleeve shirt on a 95-degree day, and I was just shaking my head going, wow, if my son could see this, he would be horrified. The competition's moved in on his turf. But the best part was, you know, clearly I wasn't going to buy lemonade from my son's competitor. And he goes, "Would you like some lemonade?" And I was like, "No, thanks. I don't have any cash." He immediately whips out a piece of cardboard with an enlarged QR code taped to it and says, "I take Venmo." I was just like, I have to buy lemonade now. I mean, I was holding my phone, so I couldn't say I don't have my phone. I was just so, but you know, it's so interesting to think about. Is that a digitally enabled business? He knew the most common objection would be, "I don't have cash on me." I actually did have cash on me. I was just trying to be polite and say no. But he was ready. He was ready for that objection with a digital solution. And then I started thinking about how QR codes only 2 years ago, there was very few people in my own orbit, and I'm sure in many of yours, that knew what a QR code was and how it works. 5 years ago, and Lindsay reminded me of this, we heard about the death of the QR code. It was all the rage, you know, 2 decades ago, and then QR codes are going to change the future, and then they pretty much fizzled out. And then a pandemic brought them back. And more of us have been to restaurants where, you know, you can't see the menu unless you can open up a QR code. Which I don't particularly enjoy as an experience, you know, looking at a menu on my phone.
Not my favorite, no.
Right? It's not the best, but it solved a problem, a very timely one. And it just so happens smartphones changed the way that they're able to absorb a QR code. It's a lot easier to get to that link through the QR code than it used to be. So really interesting to think about the amount of change that gets me to the point of a 6th grader showing me a QR code on a piece of cardboard so I can pay him $2 for this cup of lemonade. Pretty remarkable. So I think that's a great real world example of the kinds of shifts that we're seeing, and our need to respond to those changes, or else you know, risk losing our you know, hollowed real estate next to the bike path, selling lemonade.
Yep. And to kind of pull a business perspective into this too, like we laughed really hard at that story, by the way. But if you go back to the stat that says there's 70% of new value created over the next decade is based on these digitally enabled platforms, it actually makes sense that a survey done by Glassbox showed that 84% of executives agree that excellence in this digital CX world is actually vital to their survival, right? So it tracks that, if we're going to be this way in 10 years, then this type of digital CX is absolutely essential to survival. But the funny part is, the ironic part is perhaps that too often organizations actually fall short in this world. They fall short in delivering truly user-centered experiences for their customers because they do things, they build things like, oh, I think that they want this, or I know my customers, they're gonna love this. Or they generate these lists of features or even lists of products to go build without actually involving the customers in the conversation, or even considering how these products, how these things fit into the overall experience that a customer has. They focus on outputs and features and things like that, and not outcomes and behaviors that we want to change. And the disconnect that we see between this is actually evident in a study done by Bain & Company, that said 80% of businesses believe they're doing the right thing. They think they're doing good, but when you ask their customers, 8% of them actually agree. Huge gap. And actually, I've seen this study done a couple different places by a couple different organizations, depending on who did it and what industry they're looking at. The numbers vary somewhat, but the divide is still really big between what we think as companies that we're doing, we're actually serving these, versus what our customers believe. Is it shocking? Maybe, I don't know, might be shocking to you, but it's not to us. It's not actually very surprising. 3Pillar oftentimes has a front row in these types of conversations as we try to help our customers create these delightful digital products that are designed to not only solve a problem for a user, but to be a pivotal part of their overall customer experience and helping them build out these digitally enabled platforms. So over the course of the conversation, we're going to dig in a little bit deeper and some, like Scott said, to kind of filter through some of the noise and then try to pull ourselves back up and connect the dots for you. So if we want to connect the first set of dots, we're going to talk about the relationship of CX and UX. Because I hear it used a lot as the same term, CX and UX, same thing. It's not. It's actually quite different. They are symbiotic, but they are very different. So CX, so we're all on the same page, customer experience, is the sum total of all the interactions a user has with your brand, from the physical store to any digital tools that they might use, to customer support, shipping, packaging, the entire journey. It actually even starts before they start interacting with your brand, because they have a problem that needs solved and they start looking for a solution. In there, they find you, they decide to use you, and so forth. You see the cycle. So good CX helps your customers have an enjoyable interaction with your brand across all touch points. Now, UX, on the other hand, user experience, is focused on dealing with how users engage with a product. Most commonly, when we hear about UX, it's in relation to a digital product, though, like Scott had mentioned, you could probably argue that physical products count in here as well. For our conversation, we're going to focus in the digital realm, but know that we could also have that conversation. But UX helps users access the information they need when they need it in a manner in which matches their mental model. It helps them use the product more effectively. It helps support the behaviors and the outcomes that can generate success for a brand. So then if you explode that out a little bit further, Scott, if you go to the next slide, and you look at all the activities that happen inside of the CX and UX world, professionals in UX and in customer experience design use many of the same tools for their craft. But you can see there are some differences, because CX takes a very broad, one of the broadest views possible of a customer's relationship with the brand and with the products. And UX focuses more specifically on the interactions with the product. Similar intents, creating the best experience possible for a user, but different lenses. And now both of them are absolutely necessary. And one without the other one can spell disaster for a brand. Because if you think about it this way, I would assume most people fly, right? And probably now that we're back to traveling, most of you have probably flown in the last 6 or so weeks. Think about, you can book your flight. You can access your boarding pass through a beautiful little app. Pick your airline. They all have them now. In fact, I fly United most often, and I just realized I flew to India. United added this awesome feature where I can now know all of the different travel restrictions and document restrictions and document needs, because every country was different based on COVID protocols. So I didn't have to worry about where I was going. They told me everything I needed. I uploaded it. It was all there. It was so simple. Made it so much less stressful to travel. But like, think about that. I had a great experience in the app. Now I walk into the airport. And in the airport, I am met with long lines, understaffed counters, not very happy people. Confusing signage, where do I put my stuff? And let's not even get into what it's like when we get on the actual aircraft or trying to get onto the aircraft. So here we have this great experience with UX in the app, followed up by a not so awesome CX overall.
And I'll even add one of the places that I went to recently. I was in Romania and I went to go check in and I had uploaded all of my documents, but the person at the counter could not see my documents and so needed me to show them my documents. So I had to go, and I didn't have them printed out because I assumed I was taken care of, right? So, but the offline experience was not integrated with the online experience. So to your point, they both are vital, but they also have to be integrated.
Right. And it can leave you with a bad taste in your mouth, right? Like you had this great experience and then this, like the one you're left with last is usually the one you remember. And it can actually happen the other direction too. So the impacts are a little bit different, but still fairly damaging, right? So you download an app, you go to a website, you try to, complete a purchase and it fails. Luckily for you, there is some way on the website to go call the sales team so that you can complete this purchase. You call them, you speak to them. The agent was wonderful, so sweet. I'm so sorry, this is so bad. Processes your payment and gives you a credit to boot. Like, woohoo, yes, awesome customer experience. To salvage a broken user experience, consider the cost of that. A broken user experience salvaged by great CX comes with its own costs. You have to pay for the agents, you have to pay for the vouchers, you have to pay for the doubt that has been sown in this person's mind because the app didn't do or the website didn't do what they expected it to do. So I'm hoping you can start to see how they are interconnected and related to one another, but give you a little bit different lens for each of them to use, right? So for the problem from a CX lens, let's make this easy and let's make it awesome. From a UX lens, it's like, well, let's make it right in the first place. So we don't have to make it easy and make it awesome. So we don't have to fix it later. So I hope you can start to see how the two interact. So Scott, if you go to the next slide, I'm gonna.
Yes. We'll start by talking about a physical world problem. There we go. I've got some a physical world problem that we're trying to digitally enable. Lindsay, can you talk to us about this? Get us kicked off?
Yep. So I'm going to give a little bit different example, but I think still very, very related. And this is one that most 3Pillarites know very, very well. So patron walks into a Calvin Klein store on their lunch break, looking for a very particular item, this green cardigan that they had found online, but wanted to see it in person. So they get to the store, they find the cardigan, great, awesome, it's beautiful, it's exactly what they wanted, only to realize they don't have it in their size. So eventually they locate a store associate, a helpful store associate, hoping that they have it in the back. And so the store associate walks away to go check it, go to the back of the store. Who knows when they're coming back at this point? This poor patron who's standing here has no idea. And the time's ticking, right? It's our lunch hour. I don't have the time to stand here and wait for this unknown person to come back. So they leave the store annoyed, right? They just wasted the lunch hour trying to get this thing and they walked away empty-handed. It's a bad experience in a lot of ways, right? So Calvin Klein lost the sale at that point. They might get it back later online, but they won't know. And they've sowed that kind of bad experience in that person's head. Like, hey, this is a bad idea. I shouldn't have done this. I'm going to walk away with that bad taste. But what if the store associate could help the patron right there on the spot without having to leave them, right? They can scan the barcode on the cardigan, find out immediately if it is indeed in the back storerooms or if it's in the store down the road, or even they could have it shipped directly to their house, no problem. Right? So completely different experience for this patron. They walk away satisfied, and whether they walk away with the cardigan in their hand or that it shows up at their door a couple days later, they're still satisfied with this experience. This is actually the very scenario that we walked through with Calvin Klein. When Phillips Hughes and PVH approached us, they came to us with a question. right? And it was actually a fairly broad question, and I'm going to have Scott walk you through kind of how we got to the answers on it. But how could you digitally enhance an in-store shopping experience for a clothing brand, right? And they also had a secondary thing that they wanted to prove, which was kind of fun. They wanted to prove to their own organization that they could innovate faster than their internal teams thought that they could. So I'm going to ask Scott to kind of walk us through the process, because they did. They came to us with a broad question, and we had to work with them to find the answer.
Yeah, it's an awesome story, and of course the story that you tell, Lindsay, starts with starts at the end, right? So we have figured out a way to enhance the store experience, but to get there, we went through a series of steps in a very short amount of time. So one of the things that we did first is we did ideation sessions with PVH. Now, in these sessions, the goal is to be as broad as possible, to think of all the possible ways that you could enhance the in-store experience, whether digitally or not. You're really trying to keep this conversation as non-constrained as possible. What are all the ways in which we believe we can enhance the in-store experience? And so we did this work with folks at PVH, came up with I can't even remember how many different ideas, and then narrowed that set of ideas down to a few that we thought had potential. But by a few, I mean like 10 different, there were like at least 10 different sketches. And then we started doing different sketching ideation sessions. What that means is we would take an idea at a time and have multiple people sketch what they thought that might look like in terms of an experience. And then through that we came to, okay, well, this is the part of this and part of that together feels like the right direction. And we got down to a certain number of prototypes. We then took those prototypes, actually, before we got to this phrase, we took those prototypes as concepts. Sorry, I'm trying to go back. We took those as concepts into stores and talked to store associates and said, if you had something like this, would this be helpful to you? Would this solve problems or challenges that you actually experience in the store with your customers? And it's really important at that point. So again, you can deliver an app, but you can't make store associates necessarily use it in the way you imagine. So it's really important that the associates themselves see this as solving a problem or providing and allowing them to provide a better service than they can otherwise. And so early on, we want to make sure we get that feedback that we're on the right track. We then, once we identified that the use case that Lindsay just spoke of really was high value for them, and there were a bunch of ideas on things that we could do with such an app, but really it came down to inventory. Do we have the item that this person is asking for? Do we have it in the color they're looking for? Maybe they wanted the cardigan, but they weren't sure if we had it in green and they wanted it in green. So do we even make it and sell it in green? So those types of inventory questions were the ones that they wanted to have in-person experiences, seamless experiences while they're in the store with the customer, and the associate could provide more intel and enrich that experience, that interaction and very quickly. And so we settled on this sort of, we can scan barcodes, we can pull up inventory, we can see what stores they're located at, that use case as a way to enhance the in-store experience. Work through different designs. Oh, I'm so sorry, my computer's being funky.
Yeah.
Okay, right there. This is where we got to. So here you can actually see what the app looked like. To be able to scan items, get inventory information, find like items, and be able to walk the customer through the full breadth of what Calvin Klein has to offer, not just what's in the store at that particular moment. And again, enhance that experience. This whole process that I just described, all the way to a working app, took 6 sprints. That's 12, and each sprint was 2 weeks, so that's 12 weeks. It doesn't have to take that long. And as Lindsay mentioned, the hidden agenda on the part of the people who hired us at PVH was to really show their own organization that we can add value quickly. That there's nothing in PVH's infrastructure or environment that prevents them from being able to deliver new value quickly. And in fact, one of the coolest parts of this story is the CEO, who was not involved in our engagement, went into the store and got a demo of the app in store, and it was immediately why don't we have this in every store under every brand? Philips Van Heusen has several different brands, Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, and several others, and was like, this should be everywhere. We should be doing this everywhere. So, and we actually did some of the follow-on work to expand this to other brands and other locations. But a really fun example of how we, with very little time, work through a series of ideas, identify ones that are value add, you validate, you test, you're working with cheap prototypes. These were cheap, they were fast, and then you go to build because you know you're sitting on value, and now the only thing that's stopping you is being able to build it. But you can build it much quicker and be much more assured that you've added value.
Yep. So that story is just a glimpse into why understanding your customer journey is a critical piece of creating a valuable outcome. So one of the other points we wanted to make today is talking about how taking user research, building out those customer journeys is so essential to creating great digital products that contribute to great customer experience. Well, it's a lot of words in one sentence, but you can start to see the continuum that it starts to build out, right? So we interact with hundreds of brands in a given day, right? Companies want their products to be chosen, and in order to be chosen, they have to stand out from the crowd. They have to offer a solution that meets the user where they are, meets them when they need it the most. Because customers, honestly, when we talk about CX, we talk about omni-channel and these crazy words about, you know, hitting them from every angle, but customers don't care about the channel that you're using. Customers care that you get them at a point in their journey where the problem that they're having needs to be solved, and you give it to them in a way that allows them to solve it. It matches their mental model. And the only way to do this is to have a deep understanding of them and their journey. And the way we get there is through using our user research and our user experience activities. Don't actually, I mean, we say this, right? But other people say this too. So there's a study done by Forbes Insights and Glassbox. That's what you see on the screen here. Talked to 400 leading US-based business executives across all sorts of industries. And they found out that the largest opportunity for growth in these companies is mapping and understanding each customer's digital journey. But the funny part is only a third of those, it's not funny actually, only a third of those executives actually reported having a full grasp of their customers in the end-to-end digital journey. Yet,
And I'm not sure that third is right.
Well, right? Because we see in these in the engagements that we undertake with clients, we see that these same people are participating in these, you know, priority setting exercises, and they're the ones that are helping to create these feature lists and you know, starting some of these challenges that we face, right? So they set the list of features based on an inadequate understanding of the customer journey or what the customer's perception of value is. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask Scott to walk us through how we reset the conversation away from this feature list and into something that is more productive and something that's more tangible to creating value for customers.
Yeah, so it's really fantastic that we, 3Pillar, were able to be along for all the different phases of this particular story that I'm going to tell. This is a real story of failure then gone right, and so the starting point of this is we're working with a Fortune 500 networking equipment company, very well-known brand. And there was an executive that wanted to reduce support call volumes and support costs by improving the quality of the software. Makes sense. This executive engaged with 3Pillar to build an application and a program that would improve quality and improve visibility to executive leadership around quality, and quality defined as defects, defect reduction, defect management, and making sure that they're shipping software that works, that's higher quality. We were very successful. We built some interesting tools that I would love to brag about, but I won't spend any time here talking about. But they were ways of integrating quality control measures into the build cycle, as well as giving visibility externally without a lot of manual effort. And so that was very successful. We were able to improve all the quality metrics that we went after. However, the support calls remained. They didn't budge. And it's really important to understand why. Now here I'm gonna walk you through, gosh, I don't know why this is lagging so bad. There we go. Come on.
Nope, back up.
There we go. So kind of to understand this, I want to introduce a concept, which is outcomes over outputs. If an outcome as defined as a measurable change in behavior, can be internal behavior or external customer behavior, but a measurable change in behavior that leads to a business result. Okay, so that's an outcome. Oftentimes, these planning sessions that Lindsay was describing are all about outputs. And in fact, if we take our use case here and apply the model, the hypothesis is that the impact we want is to reduce call volume. We want to reduce support costs. The output that the executive focused us on was fewer defects in software deployed by teams may reduce support call volume. So now it's a hypothesis, which naturally invites the question of what other hypotheses do we have about support call volume and where it comes from. Now, just for grins and giggles, I'm going to show you what one of the screens looks like for this particular company's networking equipment. I have a history, and I started my career in telecommunications. I happen to have I configured routers. This is a router config screen. I got a certification in it. It is hard. It is very, very hard. You can tell the screen is not very well designed for clarity. And the stakes are really high for this company's customers, because if you misconfigure your network, you open yourself up to data breaches or network breaches, stolen information, and everything all the way to a drop in stock price. So configuring your network equipment correctly is really, really important. And so another possible hypothesis here, gosh, there's a lot of lag. I'm worried about that. Oh, let me shut something. So another possible hypothesis here is that the experiences that if we were able to deliver software that gave customers more confidence that they had configured their networks correctly, then we might reduce support call volume as well. And it turns out that this hypothesis actually is a much bigger driver to support call volume. They were using the support team as a help desk because they weren't sure if they were configuring this equipment correctly. And that insight, and now think about this. This particular company lost multiple years, multiple millions of dollars, not only what they spent with us, but the waste of time internally creating dashboards, having executives review dashboards about defects. And at the end of the day, that reduction of defects had no impact on support call volume. So they didn't get any of the ROI. And most importantly, and this is the thing that we have to remain cognizant of, the thing you will never get back is time. So during that time, the competition has the ability to gain on you and to exploit your lack of understanding of what customers really need to be successful. And that I think is the most important loss here. It's, money can be made. Executive time is what it is, but the loss of time in the market and your competitiveness can be detrimental. And I apologize. I hear that there is some lag on my side. I'm going to try to eliminate some things here.
And while you're doing that, I will try to tee up the next bunch of stuff. So now that I've kind of gone through framing up the importance of CX, talking about CX and the relationship to UX and how it relates to your digital product. We're going to pivot just a bit and kind of start to weed whack our way through some of the common jargon that you tend to hear along the journey. Like I said earlier, CX and UX are used synonymously in many places, but they are very different things. And you can even add a DCX or a digital CX into that world as well. So there's a lot of terms, a lot of things that get thrown around, and sometimes it's hard to understand what's relevant, what's not relevant, how do I handle that? So I'm going to ask Scott to kind of walk us through the next couple slides as we go through. So are you all set? Are we good?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
So far, so good. All right.
We lost our host, so I don't know where David went, but I will find him.
I am here.
You're there. Okay, good.
He's lurking. All right, so here are three terms that you're going to hear that younger version of me struggled to reconcile, and so definitely some terms we want to demystify. Design thinking, lean, you're going to hear lean startup, and agile. And oftentimes when these were originally presented to me, they were presented as differentiated approaches to product development. In actuality, they're complements to one another. Then they try to reinforce the same concepts we've been talking about, but at different phases of the life cycle of a product. Not really the life cycle of a product, the different phases of ideation all the way through execution is probably a better way to say it. So in design thinking, you're really trying to make sure you keep a broad view, that you're trying to solve for a need, and you're taking the broadest possible view of how that need might be met and how your company might meet that need. And one of the things about design thinking that's also really important is the observation, and something we'll talk about in a bit, contextual inquiry, actually seeing users that are encountering this problem and what do they do and what's in their environment, and what other tools are they using, and what are they solving for when they do these things. You can gain an amazing amount of information from observing people in their natural environment, if you will, and seeing what kinds of behaviors they do, and then inquiring, why do you do them? Why do you do it that way? What are you actually going after that leads you to solve this problem in that way? This opens all kinds of opportunities then to add value in unexpected ways. And so design thinking is really great for keeping the lens broad and really opening you up to understanding in deepening your understanding of the way that people behave in nature, given what they have. This then leads you to hypotheses on how you could probably help them solve those things better. And this is where lean is really strong. Lean really focuses on, it's great that you have a hypothesis, but now you need to be able to do the smallest amount of effort, or the cheapest version of your product idea, and test it with users and see if they would adopt it, if they would use it, if they would change behavior in the way that you expect. And again, a purchase is a change in behavior. Sometimes you want eyeballs. Sometimes you're trying to drive traffic to your site. Sometimes there's all kinds of different outcomes that you can be trying to achieve. But the question that you want to make sure you can answer is that these sets of outputs, if I do this, you will do that. And so lean really focuses on that experimentation before you get into the build cycle, where agile's strength is what I call ritualized change management. So what agile does is it says, okay, we're gonna build in iterations, and people oftentimes think that's just we're gonna release chunks of software every 2 weeks, but the real value of agility is that every moment that we're able to take in new information, we're able to act on that information. So really what we're talking about here is a very rich discovery loop where we're bringing in new insight, new information continuously, and combining that with a build process that can act and respond to that new information. And so this is a good way to see the three of these together. The second set of jargon, and this one we actually had a fun debate about actually just before this call.
I'm gonna have to hold you on the rails for this one, by the way.
Yeah, I know. I can go deep on this one. I have a passionate point of view as someone who's built products at product companies several times. Yes, I have a particular viewpoint, but I really want to emphasize certain aspects of this. That experimentation cycle is I'm absolutely champion, and I think it's crucial. The one thing that Lean created some confusion around is it calls the thing that we experiment on an MVP, which I don't think is actually correct for reasons that I'll explain. So for our purposes, prototypes are for experimentation. So this could be paper prototypes, like I talked about in the Calvin Klein example, where we're taking paper prototypes of what we think we could build and be able to work with the store, convey enough of what that thing is going to do to a store associate so they can tell us whether or not that idea is valuable to them. So it doesn't have to be built software. You can get away with things that don't actually work, or manually Turk things behind the scene, meaning you're using humans to perform a function that looks like software is doing it, but it's actually being done by humans. And the intent is not that these are viable, it's that you're mining for the insight. And those things then get thrown away once you've proven, yes, there is gold in the mountain and it's right here. Now I want to go mine for it. And then you build out your MVP. There's another cousin to all of this, the proof of concept, that oftentimes will get misused. Proof of concepts for us are technical. So if there is a technical hurdle, say you've got a machine learning component, or you're thinking about using, it can be anything. I could use 100 examples, they'll sound very nerdy, but you're thinking about using a new piece of cloud technology in your platform because you think that's going to help with reliability and uptime. You're going to go do proof of concepts in order to prove those out and make sure that they're viable and valuable for you to do for real. And so that's where we use proof of concepts. And then minimal viable product, the really important thing from our perspective at 3Pillar is the viability aspect. The things that you will do with a prototype, you can get away with hacking a prototype. Again, it can be paper, it doesn't have to even be a product, right? But your minimal viable product is actually your starting point for the future product that you're going to be working towards. And certainly one of the hardest things about a minimal viable product is agreeing upon what minimal is. This is oftentimes one of the most difficult conversations we have with clients. They want it to be feature complete. Products are never done, so that's a false goal. You really want to get started in the learning process. You want to have a piece of working software, and so it's really important to us that your MVPs are viable, but also that they can excel at change, because you are going to learn some things that you don't know yet, and you want to be able to respond to that change with quality and speed. Hopefully I didn't go too long on that topic, Lindsay.
Good job, good job.
User-centered design, this is another piece of jargon you're going to hear a lot. It really is, as a term, it's not that different from what we talked about here, customer-centric design, or making sure that we are solving customer problems in a way that makes sense to them. Lindsay talked about the mental model. How if you're solving a problem for a user in a way they don't recognize, they're not going to know to take advantage of it. And so you want to make sure it's placed correctly, that it's at the point of the problem and at the point that they're looking for a solution to that problem. And so user-centered design is really a fancy way of saying all the things that we've just talked about. And one of the things, though, that I think gets lost is this idea that in user-centered design, we are trying to mine for those insights around behavior and mental models. We are trying to understand those as much as possible, so that then throughout your build process, all the way from the ideas for features that we have and how we execute on them, what kind of information we put on the screen. One of my favorite examples, like totally mundane examples of this, and the reason why you need to have user-centered design in your build process, is the "Are you sure" button. Everybody's had the "Are you sure" button. You click on something, you submit a form, it says, "Are you sure you want to do this?" When it's put in the right place, say, my banking app before I wire funds to someone else, "Are you sure you want to send this money to this place?" I really appreciate that. That's a high stakes transaction and I can't undo it easily. If you put it somewhere where I can easily undo it or change it, then this is really an extra click and is really annoying. And so knowing the points where you're dealing with a high stakes transaction for the user and a low stakes transaction is something that requires constant feedback loops, that you're working with real humans. One of the best things about this, though, is that these days it's a lot easier to do user-centered design than it's ever been. Usertesting.com, you can actually get real humans to look at your software and tell you if it does what they think it should do. You can use online tools like Lookback to proctor user research interviews, and it's amazing. You can actually get the full value of usability research from 5 to 7 users. You will start to see patterns emerge very quickly. Where do people get confused? Where do they get stuck? What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? So really, it's really easy to integrate this into your build process, and too few of our clients are doing it. So this is probably the best takeaway from user-centered design. I keep thinking it's this computer. It's that computer. Another fancy jargon term that we hear that took me a while to understand is contextual inquiry. Contextual inquiry is a really fancy way of saying sit with your users. Go. You have to leave the building. Steve Blank, who is a professor at Stanford and participated in with Eric Ries on the Lean movement. He's credited with being one of the godfathers of Lean. We interviewed him, and one of the things he just says over and over again, he's like, I will not invest in any company where the CEO has not gotten out of the building. In other words, the solutions to customer problems are where the customers are. You cannot solve them from your whiteboard in your boardroom. That is not where the solution lies. The solution lies outside your building. And it's such a powerful point, but it really is a version of all the things we've been talking about here. But just to bring this home, we have a wonderful story with Carfax where Carfax had gotten advice. So back a long time ago, they used to be purely a B2C. For those of you who are old enough to remember Carfax, get your Carfax report or a used car report. They advertise on TV all the time. They still do. But they were purely business to consumer, meaning if you were thinking about buying a used car, you would run a Carfax report, and that was their business model. They saturated the market, and they were like, we're 80% of the market already. Where do we go from here? How do we find growth? And they engaged with McKinsey, and McKinsey said, you need to break into dealerships. You need to go B2B. But Carfax was not necessarily popular with dealerships at that point. They had caused many a customer not to buy their cars through their Carfax reports. And so they asked us to help them figure out a way to break into the dealership market. We had a UX researcher go to a dealership and for several days and just observe and see if we could pick up some ideas of where Carfax's data could be utilized by dealerships to add value. And one day the researcher noticed that the car buyer was going to auction, and he asked to go along. And he went to auction. I'm going to shorten the story, but he noticed that the auction, you weren't allowed to drive the car, you weren't allowed to turn the car on. You had very limited time before the auction started to look at the car, get a sense of what you wanted to pay for it, and then you were in the auction and you decided how much you wanted to pay for it. And the researcher was sort of amazed at which cars the buyer would bid on and which ones not, and how he can. And he was like, wow, like you have stunningly little information about that vehicle before you buy it. And they were like, yeah, but I've done this for many years and I have a lot of knowledge and so forth. It was like, well, what if we could make it so that you could, just from scanning the VIN, you could get the history of that car, and also what data around how much you might pay for it based on some algorithm, and what that car is selling for on other lots, just so that you had more information basically to be able to make a purchase decision. And they're like, yeah, that would be great, as long as it doesn't tell me what I have to pay for it, because hey, I've been doing this a long time. Yeah, that information could be really helpful. And clearly for dealerships who were relying heavily on these buyers in order to drive margins, to buy the right cars and not the wrong ones, this was really important. So we were able to help Carfax identify that first entry, and I'm proud to say that their dealership solutions business is now a far greater revenue stream than their B2C business.
All right, so I love that story, and actually I spent a lot of time not with Carfax at the car auctions, but another automotive company, and the car auctions, they're fascinating. And it is fascinating how fast these buyers have to figure out, are they going to buy this car or not? And a lot of them, the older ones, are like, I can tell by the smell, by the sound, by the whatever. But having that extra Carfax data, they do actually use that. We watched them afterwards, this is years later, and they use that Carfax data, which is kind of fun to see the circle complete itself. But as we get towards the end of our time here, I want to kind of put a few final thoughts out there for us. So I hope that it's clear, we've made it clear that the upside potential of an outcomes and a CX approach is huge for an organization. And actually the downsides of not doing this are almost unbearable. It could threaten your business as a whole. Recognize it's not easy, but it's definitely worth the effort to do it. There's no excuse, right? It's easier than it's ever been. Still not super easy, but it's easier than it was 5 years ago We do a lot of stuff virtually now. We do a lot of just getting out and talking to the users. 5 users is not a lot to have to talk to get the information you need. You don't have to have massive budgets. You don't have to be these great big growth hacking type organizations to be able to do some of these things. Nor does it have to take a ton of time, right? Small iterative approaches over time get you a lot further than big bang approaches, right? So if you gain nothing else out of this, we have 3 points. I've got 1 for you. Scott's got 2 for you. 1 is inject a little humility into your conversation. If you find yourself talking about features, you should be talking about hypotheses. You should be using user research and experimentation to ensure you're solving the problem that your customers want to pay for. But sometimes that's hard. Like, I know my customer. Sometimes you don't. And it's okay to not do that. This is why we have user research. This is why we do these activities.
Yeah, and it's important to remember at all times, and let my son's lemonade stand, be the proof. There's always competition ready to take your business, and to step in on your ground, and so it becomes really important to continue to mine for insights, and keep your competitive edge, and continue delivering new value to even your existing customers. But it's also important if you want to expand your business, which I've yet to meet a business leader who does not want to do that.
Your users' needs change too, right? The world changes around us. The last 3 years tells us nothing, is that things can change on a dime. And if you don't continue to evaluate and iterate, you're going to get left behind.
Yeah, and the other thing to remember, and I think this is important for us as technologists to keep in mind as well, is that it's not always a digital solution that you need to solve a customer problem. And we used a couple of examples today where the problem was an offline problem augmented by a digital solution. But even I find that companies that are digital first, where the experiences there and products that they're providing are digital, that they're even less likely to understand that there are offline solutions to online problems. And so just really important to continue to keep our perspective broad, and really understand the world of possibilities of solutions, just as we seek those insights on how we might meet those customer needs. And just to really wrap it up in a final thought, and this is one that over countless customers I've observed, is that a lot of times people tend to think that technology is where you're going to get your competitive advantage, and they're willing to spend a lot of money to get that competitive advantage. But I'd actually posit with you that the competitive advantage that matters in the digital economy and in the economy going forward is knowing your customers better than your competitors. If you know your customers better than your competitors, you will be able to deliver multiple value opportunities. You'll have multiple value add opportunities with those customers, and that edge will outpace other types of competitive advantage.
Okay.
David, how are we doing on questions?
We got 5 minutes and a question.
I was just going to say, we've certainly got 1 or 2, but I just wanted to remind people that you can ask a question, particularly here as we wrap up, by going to the questions panel. As you're starting to do that, there is one question that I think would be helpful if we answered. I think you paint a really great picture that's not always the reality for some of us, right? So in many cases, we don't have the budgets, the time, or even the executive support to do user research. So how do you suggest we approach that?
Lindsay, you want to take it, or me?
No, I'm letting you have this one.
Well, one of the things I think is to there's actually a book. Oh gosh, I'm gonna forget the author, so my attribution is not going to be complete. But a book about outcomes over outputs. That's really good at it frames up some things that he calls the magic questions. And so if we go back to the example of the networking equipment company, if we had reframed the ask as a hypothesis, simply said, okay, I see what you're trying to do. We're trying to reduce support call volume, and your hypothesis is that if we improve software quality, we're going to reduce support call volume. Fantastic, totally get it. Just by restating it that way, it naturally begs the question, well, wait a minute, do we know that hypothesis is true? What evidence do we have? What else might we do? And so I think that the easiest way is just to start using the language of hypothesis, in terms of like, we have a list of features you want to build. Each one of those is a guess. And they're educated guesses, and they come from very highly paid executives. So I honor that for what it is, but just restating them as hypotheses can be really, really powerful way to say, we don't actually know if this is going to deliver the value that we're intending, or the behavior changes that we want. And then on top of that, then to start talking about what are the behaviors that we're hoping that feature is going to cause that are then going to lead to impact on our business. Again, you're asking very innocent questions. These are questions that businesses should be able to answer, and yet oftentimes they cannot. And it's a process. There's definitely an evolution, but I think you can just start with language. That's where I would start. I don't know, Lindsay, do you have any thoughts? Where else and tips?
Go ahead,
Sorry.
David. Go ahead.
I was going to say, we have another question coming up.
Yeah, actually, I was like, I would love to expand, but I want to also get to the next question. So,
Yeah.
And so this is from Neil Smith. In the conversation, you mentioned building things to address customer needs often. Research and design may lead to less of this and more of that kind of trade-offs, not just building new things. Can you speak to those trade-offs and how they drive good CX?
Oh, Lindsay, this is all you.
I can start and you can pick it up. I mean, and Scott and I have gotten into this conversation a lot. Like, everything we do is about trade-offs. It's understanding, you have to understand the user context, the business context, the tech context, and making trade-offs. The same thing happens in good CX, right? So you're not going to always be able to do everything. You're going to have to look for the things that generate the biggest opportunity or the most value for your users. You're right, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to build new things. Maybe it's optimizing the things that we have. Maybe it's deprecating something that we don't need to use anymore. And we get in situations where you get, products that are over featured. Maybe that's for good CX, for good UX, you need to go start cutting some of that. And again, to one of our last points, where it doesn't have to be a digital solution, considering the overall CX, maybe it's not a digital solution. And so research and understanding your customers and their journey can help us make those decisions. Kind of plotting out their path and how they interact with your brand can help you understand where the pain points are, and where we need to optimize or not. So I don't know, Scott, if you want to add anything.
Well, yeah,
Because we are at time.
we're talking. You said something that I think is really powerful, which is like, what are you optimizing for? And being intentional and clear about that is really valuable. And I remember when Google Docs first came to the scene, and when you could first do essentially a Word document. I know Google wouldn't call it a Word document in Google, but the first time that you could do a Word style document in Google, they took everything that Microsoft Word had and then stripped it way down to the basics. So it was very feature poor. And then they've steadily added features over time and tried to do so in a way that doesn't bloat, because Word had gotten to the point where it had so many fancy features that you were more likely to end up in a place where it's like, how do I undo whatever it is that I just did? Because there's so many of these higher end features for power users, and I'm not trying to be a power user. I'm just trying to write a quick document and move on. And so I thought Google's approach was thoughtful, but I think they saw that feature bloat in Word created an opportunity for them, that it only now are we seeing Microsoft through Microsoft 365 actually getting around to answering the threat of Google Docs. So kind of interesting story there, just in terms of optimizing for what do they really need, and do they need all these other features. I'm sure there are users that'll benefit from that 100th feature, but one of the things that we talk about is feature factories or the build trap. And once a team is established around a product, adding features is generally how we determine success. And therein lies our biggest fundamental problem. Building more stuff is not success. Building a better thing that is optimized to solve customer needs in a more thoughtful way is better. but we really don't incent or reward or recognize teams for building a better product. We optimize for building more features.
Yep.
Superb. Scott, Lindsay, thank you so much for sharing all these wonderful insights with us. We are at time. If anybody does have other questions and would like to ask them, feel free to email myself, Angela or Ali, and we'll get them to Lindsay and Scott, and we will perhaps kind of bring this group back together again to answer them. I thank you so much all for your time on behalf of us all. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.